you guys do that, follow the devotionals, the day breaks. And if you're familiar with that, you know that we've kind of looked at Timothy here recently. We're into Titus, I think now. But we're going to go back and look at one of the lessons, the discovery lesson for 1 Timothy 1 through 6:21 tonight. So if you do have your Bibles, it may be good to turn over to the book of 1 Timothy. 1 Timothy. First Timothy 1:1. The key verse for this lesson is, "Let no man despise thy youth, but be thou an example of the believers in word, in conversation, in charity, in spirit, in faith, in purity." And that's found in 1 Timothy 4:12. So just a little background history into this lesson. Paul's first epistle to Timothy is thought to have been written about the AD 64. During the last few years of Paul's life, it is referred to as a pastoral epistle, as are 2 Timothy and Titus. Paul was Timothy's spiritual father and wrote to encourage and instruct him in practical subjects such as doctrine, public worship, qualifications for church officials, and confrontation of false teaching in the church. He also instructed Timothy concerning the treatment of widows, elders, and servants. So if you have read that and you've looked over that, you know that there was a lot of instruction that Paul was giving to Timothy, which was a younger minister that was kind of being mentored by Paul. So, and it's good to have a mentor, somebody that can maybe if you're unsure, you can ask questions or you can watch their life even, and that's why this key verse here, "Be thou an example of the believers." So that's what we want to do, is we want to be an example. Timothy was the youngest member of the only 3-generation family of believers mentioned in the New Testament. He was a young man when he joined Paul in the city of Lystra in Galatia. On the apostles' second missionary journey, his father was a Greek and his mother Eunice was a Jew. Paul took Timothy with him on his third missionary trip, spending 3 years with him in Ephesus and the surrounding areas. After Paul's trip in Rome, Timothy was present with Paul in Rome when Paul wrote 3 of his prison letters, Philippians, Colossians, and Philemon. After Paul's release from his first imprisonment, he and Timothy visited the churches in Ephesus. Paul eventually left for Macedonia while Timothy stayed to minister in Ephesus. It was during this time that Paul wrote the letter to Timothy. And so as you think about this, you know, we have the luxury today of text messaging, emails, even phone calls. But just imagine a brand new young minister starting out named Timothy, who is facing challenges, and his mentor Paul is not around, or he's not available by text message or email. What do you do? Right? What do you do? So it's really something to think about. We're fortunate now that, you know, if we run into situations, we've got people right here that we can talk to. But, you know, this situation, Paul was a pretty good ways away from where Timothy was. Ephesus was a strategic center of travel and commerce situated on the Aegean Sea at the mouth of the Castor River. The city was one of the greatest seaports of the ancient world. It was distinguished by the Temple of Diana and a theater that could hold 50,000 spectators. This would be like a football stadium, similar to that. Many Jews lived there, and the seeds of the gospel are thought to have been sown in Ephesus immediately after Pentecost. So, Paul often refers to the gospel as the faith or the truth. So when you're reading through 1 Timothy, he refers to the gospel a lot of times as the faith. So if you see that, or the truth. sound or healthy teaching, godliness or sound religion. He was professing that, and he was pushing that to Timothy, that we want to give healthy teaching, sound doctrine. Paul talks about the Christian life. He emphasizes the importance of holiness. And Paul was big on the holiness thing there, and he would want to emphasize that to Timothy. He talks about church government there through the first book of Timothy. The church is presented as a united family, isn't it? And that's the way we want to be as a church body, as a united family. And he was trying to get that point across to Timothy also. The church is a family of God. And believers, and he mentions this, believers are called brothers and sisters. So Paul charged the church to minister to the poor and serve as a foundation of doctrinal and ethical truth. Hasn't changed today, isn't it? We still have the same basis. The church has the same ideals. We want to minister to the poor, and we want to serve as a foundation of doctrinal and ethical truth. So when people come and they are in one of our gospel meetings, we want to make sure they hear gospel truth. We want to make sure they hear ethical truth. And the leaders of the church are known as overseers or elders in this writing. So in that first question, it says Paul had a spiritual father-son relationship with Timothy. 1 Timothy 1, 2, and 18. How can we benefit from the example that Paul demonstrated? So if we look over into 1 Timothy, the first chapter, the second verse, how does Paul address Timothy? My own son. They weren't blood relatives, were they? But they were relatives in the gospel. And he looked at Timothy as his own son there. And then in verse 18, also, this charge I commit unto thee, son Timothy. So I think it was more than just a mentor. He had that father-son relationship going on with Timothy there, and he loved him like a son. And so as Paul is mentoring and guiding and giving advice, he's talking to him like it's just his own son, isn't he? So can you think of anybody in your life that maybe you looked at when you came into the gospel that was a mentor to you, or maybe you could confide in, that you went and talked to if you had certain questions? I know I had one when I first moved here. Brother Derry Northup, he was like a father to me. And I confided in him, and lots of questions I had, because I really never had an actual pastor until I moved here. And so I appreciated Brother Derry and Sister Berta quite a bit. In fact, I lived with them after I first moved here for a few months. And he's the same age as my dad, so I kind of looked up to him as my dad. But can you think of anybody as a mentor in your life that maybe was an example to you and you could confide in? Mm-hmm.
We got close to them and looked up to them that much that we felt like they were family. We called them an uncle.
Yep. So how do both sides benefit from the process? The mentor and the one being mentored, how do they benefit from this process of taking one under the wing and leading and guiding?
Well, obviously, the one that's getting the guidance benefits of the wisdom from the older, for sure. But also, I think the older I get, the more I realize, more and more that this gospel has to be handed off,
Mm-hmm.
and that if we are not doing a good job mentoring our young people, our middle-aged people, that the gospel
Exactly. So, and one thing for me, I don't know that I'm a mentor, but I know that there's a real blessing in watching the younger people stepping up and seeing them sing and play and participate and willing to teach and get involved in the work. That's a blessing to older people, older folks, to see this going along. So, yeah, it's really good to see that. Yeah, the mentor is blessed by seeing that, and it's just an encouragement. I don't think just to the mentor, but to the whole church body as a whole. I think everybody benefits when we see that those younger ones that are being mentored are taking to the faith and taking to the gospel and taking it to heart. So,
and it's so encouraging, like you said, when you see someone starting, I guess, their own part, taking their own part, and owning that this is their gospel, their church. It's not just somewhere that they have been brought or whatever, but it's theirs.
yeah, exactly.
So taking ownership of it is where you really see, and I'm encouraged when I see that happen.
Yep.
That's not just that they're here, but it's mine. Yeah, I got this. I'm owning it.
Yep. And seeing them digging in around the altar and praying, and it's really a blessing and an encouragement to see that the gospel's going forward. Anybody else have any comments on that?
You know, I've had lots of young people work for me through the years, mostly guys, and I taught a lot. But I found out it's very hard to teach somebody something if they think they know everything. And I have come across that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they don't really want to be told. But there are some things that only come from experience.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, looking back, when I was younger, I thought I knew more than I did. You know, and there's some things that, like I said, you may think you know, but you don't.
Yeah.
It only comes from experience, and so I think it's important to, and like I said, myself, I thought I knew more than I did, so it's important to have a heart to listen, that you will take advice from older people, somebody who's already been down the road.
Sure, absolutely.
You know,
The school of hard knocks.
I'm dealing with right now because, you know, look, I've been down the road.
Uh-huh.
You know, I know a little bit. I know a little bit more than you did.
You've been down the road and back. Huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway.
While you were talking, though, I thought that, you know, sometimes we think as mentoring, teaching, we're always got the Bible open and we're teaching them out of the Word of God, but that's not the case. In fact, a lot of the mentoring is doing like Brother Mark does and taking somebody under their wing and working with them, taking them to the job site and showing them how to swing a hammer or put two pieces of wood together. I know with Brother Derry, you know, we started a carpet cleaning business, floor cleaning business, and he went out with me and we cleaned carpets and did floors, and sometimes it was at midnight. We'd be out there cleaning floors. And but we got to spend time together and work together, and it was just a blessing to do that. So it's yes.
When Brother Mark was talking about how he's been down the road, so he knows. So he was trying to like the younger person. But you know, sometimes us old people can learn something from young people.
That's true.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
I mean, honestly, even though they have maybe had the same experiences or you know have 60 years in the gospel, there's still sometimes you can learn something from them too. So you gotta listen to them.
Exactly.
Sometimes they can do things at the same thing. You're like, I never thought about it that way.
Yeah. Exactly. They have a different point of view. And sometimes we need to be open, don't we? Good.
To Brother Rodney, Paul was instructing Timothy to, well, it said later in this first chapter, that thou mightest war a good warfare.
Mm-hmm.
This was serious business.
It was.
With Paul, and Timothy took it that way. He wasn't just giving an education like going to somebody, a young person going to college, off to college or something to learn livelihood. No, he was teaching him, you're getting ready to go into the battlefield, This is a battlefield, not a recreation room.
Exactly.
You need to get a hold of things and get ready to fight, do battle, do warfare, spiritual warfare. And it was not going to be easy. He was warning him of what was coming, and of course, Paul already had experienced some of it. And I'm sure Timothy saw some of it firsthand when he would go with Paul on his missionary journeys. That was no easy thing. You have to keep in mind that these new converts that Timothy was going to be ministering to, they were coming out of raw paganism. They had no clue what it meant to serve the living and true God. They had to be taught that. There was
a big responsibility.
Yes.
Very big. Yes. Very good.
But you know, a lot of what he was teaching Timothy was how to be strong, how to be steady, how to be all that. You know, if you take the game of football, and when I was growing up as a boy, football, it was a rough sport, but they wasn't near as big as they are now. And these guys are huge. You ever see one in a restaurant walk up beside him, boy, you look kind of small. Well, if you go out there on that field and you're not prepared physically to face those guys, they're going to wipe up the grass with you. Because and it's the same thing in the gospel. If you're, the devil is an adversary that he is relentless.
Yes.
He has no mercy.
And that's where it's really important to know where you stand, where your foundation is, because if you're wishy-washy, and that's why it's so important also to make sure that you have all your experiences and that you're grounded in the gospel, because you're going to get into those confrontations with other people, and because there's a lot of different beliefs out there. But when you're grounded in the gospel and you know what the Word of God says and you can stand on it and you're knowledgeable about it, you can fight a pretty good fight, can't you, with the Lord's help?
Brother Rodney, just how, like Brother Joel was talking about how he was teaching him to stand strong and to stand steady, he was also showing him, though, that he's not standing alone. And,
True. Yeah.
I mean, I think that that's important, whether it's from the mentor side or from the other side, you know, just to know that you're not standing alone.
Yeah, very good. Yeah.
You know, Brother Rodney, too, the mentor-mentee relationship actually builds a lot of accountability. When you talking about that, I thought back to when I was a child, and Brother Lloyd Makenumber, who is Brother Randy's grandpa.
Oh, grandpa. Okay.
Grandpa was obviously faithful in church, been faithful in the gospel for many, many years, and obviously as young people, young kids, we were taught to respect the seniors in our church, and so I had nothing but utmost respect for him. And I always looked up, and it really mattered what he had to say. And I'll never forget the day that I had been playing in the orchestra, and I was having challenges and wasn't where I should be spiritually, and had to take myself out of the work. And he hunted me down. I could take you to the place in the Chehalis church where he hunted me down and cornered me up and said, I noticed you're not playing in the orchestra. What's going on? And he wasn't being mean. He wasn't trying to solicit gossip. He was genuinely concerned about me, a young person. And that meant so much to me, that someone who I looked up to so much would be concerned about my spiritual well-being.
Yep.
It meant the world to me.
Yeah, that's
and when I got myself right spiritually, then there were times that maybe I was struggling, and I would think of that and think, oh, I don't want to let Brother Lloyd down. And really, it's not letting God down, but that accountability is there.
Sure.
And as mentors, we're accountable to those that we're mentoring. And if we fail, the devil's going to use that to try and destroy them as well.
Absolutely. It's a big responsibility.
It is. It's a huge responsibility.
We don't realize, as young people, we don't realize that the older people are watching our lives, and they are, they're praying for us. They're praying and watching out for us. So I would like to split this up so we can get these questions answered. So why don't we take questions 2 through 8? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Here we go. I think we can make it work.
So why don't you guys take question 2, question 3, question 4, question 5, question 6, 7, 8. Okay, let's go with question 8.
Let's take about 5 to 7 minutes. We'll try and wrap it up at 7:30.
1, 2, 3. Yeah.
Okay. You're on your own.
Yeah.
Hey, y'all know.
And we've already done question 1. Okay, we got the first. Yeah. Right. So there are 2, 3, 4. Okay, yeah, you're on your own. You can't see it.
3 says, I know it blurred out. What the chapter 2, verse 1, Paul concluded
Yeah.
What is your responsibility?
Pretty self-explanatory. What nuts?
Well, they were here today, question 1. So,
Let's just see what the question is.
What is our responsibility
Two minutes. All right. We ready? Everybody ready? Ready? Questions answered. Question 2. Why did Paul consider himself to have been chief among sinners? 1 Timothy 1:13 through 15.
Because he actually
like he persecuted Christians and he killed people for even, called them blasphemers.
Okay.
However you say that. But,
What was he? Would you say blasphemer?
Blasphemer, yeah.
You know what that means? It means to speak disrespectfully of sacred things, to speak evil of, persecute, torment, someone who torments, to pursue with harassing or oppressive treatment. That sounds like Paul or Saul, right? Before he was changed to Paul. So, good. Very good. Anything else? So, I think... Go ahead.
By being like the worst, like even though like he persecuted God and God's children, God forgave him and could use him still. So even if he was the worst of what would classify under a sinner, God could still turn you around and use you.
Exactly. So do you think Paul felt that if God could save him, he could save anybody? And kind of isn't that the way we feel when we are saved after coming out of the lifestyle that maybe we came out of? If God can save us, he can save anybody. Right? That's kind of the attitude that we need to have, because we're no better than anybody else, are we? Just thankful that God had mercy and love toward us.
Brother Rodney, I've heard that verse used kind of in a once saved, always saved concept, and they'll say, everyone sins. Who I am, chief sinner. Like Paul, they're just relating themselves to Paul. Like Paul was sinning every day, and he admits it right here in the Word of God. But if you just back it up, to verse 13, it says, "Who was before."
Exactly. Yep, blasphemer. So there was. Go ahead.
But so we know that was, he's describing himself before he was forgiven, before he was saved, and he did not consider himself to be a sinner after he was saved. He's just talking about his lifestyle before.
But there's a word in there after the three sinful acts, so to speak. There's a word in there that says, "But I obtained mercy."
That's right.
Because I did it ignorantly in unbelief.
That's right.
So Paul's ignorance was not the reason he was shown mercy, was it? It wasn't because of Paul's ignorance that he was shown mercy. It's because he was a sinner that he was shown mercy. We've all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, right? So, very good. In those three things, persecutor, I read that, but injurious. There's your word. What's that mean? Injurious? Pardon me? Violent, very good, yes. Causing or likely to cause damage or harm, hurtful, detrimental. So,
but it carried with it the thought of the intention of his heart was to do injury to Christians while he was a sinner. That his total aim in life, if you will, was to annihilate Christianity and all Christians.
Yep. So he was pretty bad, wasn't he? And that's why he felt that he was chief among sinners. Very good.
Listening to that verse makes me think about Muslims today. Especially when he said it ignorantly and unbelief. How many people out there today, persecute Christians and do them and want to injure them, want to kill them, but then we have to realize, God is a merciful God, and he can save those people as well, just as he did Paul.
Yep.
But sometimes as a human being, it's hard to look at it that way. But
They all have a soul. Yeah. If Paul can be saved, brought into the faith, so can a Muslim.
There's actually many stories of people in the Muslim faith
being
who
converted.
had dreams, and Jesus has appeared to them in their dreams, and they've come to believe. I mean, really, a Damascus Road type experience.
Wow.
And they've come and they've converted and become Christians. Lots and lots of stories like that. It's unbelievable. It's just the mercy of God.
Sure.
Just reaching out.
Yeah. And just let you know God's not done. He's
Right.
still working.
Right.
Still
You know, it
reaching
all
out.
comes down to an honest heart.
Right.
I don't care if you're a Buddhist, a Muslim, or an Islamist, or an American. There's a lot of Americans that have just as bad a heart as what them people do.
Sure. Yeah.
And Bible
Evil.
says if you just are upset at somebody without a cause, you know, it tells you what you are. So it's the mercy of God, and He'll reach an honest heart. He'll reach an honest heart no matter where they are.
Sometimes I wonder if Americans are almost more evil in their thinking because of the freedoms that they have. You know, a lot of these other countries and the financial ability that we have in this country also. A lot of the other countries that don't have much, they rely on God to provide for them, and they turn to God in hard times when it's not so easy maybe to go to a doctor or something when they get a sniffle.
Hate your brother without a cause. That's what I was looking for.
You know, I think too, you know, you look at Paul. Paul was one who was really truly faithfully doing what he thought was right. He thought he was serving God by upholding the law and what he had been taught. And here's his mentor saying this guy is a fraud and we've got to destroy these Christians. And so he's out doing what he thinks is the right thing to do with all his heart. And we see that when God got his attention through Jesus reaching out to him, then he took all that enthusiasm and said, whoa, I've been going the wrong way, and put it all into following Jesus. And so I think when we see examples like I talked about of these Muslims, these are people who are earnestly wanting to serve God, and the Muslim faith is what they know and what they've been taught. But God in his mercy reaches out to them and says, you're going the wrong way. Here's the truth.
Yes.
So when we have an honest heart, when we are earnestly seeking for the truth, we are going to find the truth. The Lord will lead us to the truth.
He's faithful. Yes. Very good. Question 3. In chapter 2, verses 1 and 2, Paul exhorted Timothy to pray for all men, including government officials. What is our responsibility today concerning our government official? Well, I don't like the guy in the White House. I ain't praying for him. Is that our attitude? Go ahead and answer that, group 3.
He said it is our responsibility to respect our governmental officials and their choices, and to pray for them and their decisions that they make.
Exactly. 2 Chronicles 7:14. If my people, which are called by my name, right, shall humble themselves and pray, then will I hear from heaven, right, and heal their land. We have a responsibility as Christians, don't we, to pray for our government and those that are in authority. In fact, it says there, Paul exhorted Timothy. What does exhort mean? It urged or advised him to do this. This is pretty important, Timothy. Yes, you need to pray for those that have the rule over you. So,
Brother Rodney, when Obama was president, we did a Bible study type thing in Roseburg, and or maybe it was Sunday school, I don't remember, but we were talking about Abraham Lincoln, and when he came into the White House, depressed, sad, upset. He wasn't a Christian, and it wasn't until he actually toured Gettysburg and he kind of had this experience like Paul did, that he actually gave his life to God and had a real experience. And that really spoke to me, and ever since then I've done my best to pray for whoever's in office, whoever, as governor or wherever I live, because I think that's so important that we really just pray for who's in office. We don't know. The Lord could be working on their heart. We don't know anything about them at all. And it doesn't matter if they're Republican or Democrat, we should be praying for them. That's our responsibility.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And it should be an honor too, to be able to pray for them.
Exactly.
And
Very
even
good.
if you don't agree with it, I don't think that you should point, make fun. You know what I'm saying?
Yes, you should
No.
Even if
honor
you
the
don't,
office.
exactly, even if you don't agree with it, I don't think that, I mean, how does it make you look if you're, you know, pointing fingers and making fun and, you know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying?
Ultimately, it's disrespectful.
Okay.
So as Christians, we've got a couple responsibilities. One is praying, right? The other is voting.
Right.
That's a huge responsibility, and it's a blessing too, that we are able to live in a free country, that we can exercise our right to vote. And if we don't agree with what's going on, go to the ballot box and change, right? That's our responsibility. You know, and I really think that we can harbor bitterness if we're not careful. We can get depressed and discouraged and look at what's going on, not only in our local government and our state government, but also in our federal government, and it can cause bitterness in our heart. And there are people like that say, I'm not voting anymore because it doesn't matter what I vote. It's not going to turn out the way I want it. That's not the right attitude, is it? We have a responsibility, and that's to pray and vote. So,
And we have to realize too, if we're doing our part, we're praying, we're voting, we're doing our part, then you have to remember that God allows whoever is in authority to be in authority.
That's right.
Whether we understand it or not, or whether we agree or not, you know, God allows that for a reason, because He sees the whole picture of everything.
Right.
Exactly.
You know, that ultimately, you know, we're getting to that point of His return. So, you know, God allows whatever needs to be allowed to hopefully get our nation to that point.
exactly. Well, do we not agree that prayer works?
Absolutely.
Right.
It does, doesn't it? So if you guys have followed any of the news here lately, just, I believe, yesterday or the day before, the Georgia governor signed the heartbeat law into effect for abortion. So if they detect a heartbeat, as far as I know, there's no abortion unless there's a couple things that would go against that. But for the most part, they're stepping back on the abortion issue in the southern states. I know Arkansas had signed a similar law here not too long ago with 18 weeks, I believe it is. So prayer works, folks, because if it didn't, it'd be going the other direction. So, all right, question 4. In chapter 3, Paul listed qualifications for 2 church offices or leadership roles. What were these roles? Why do you think Paul felt it necessary to list the qualifications for those who held these roles? Question 4.
Well, it was a bishop and a deacon, and I'm gonna be honest, we had to look them up, because I didn't know what neither one of them did.
Okay.
So what it was talking about was, he made it clear that if, these were important things. The bishop is gonna be, you know, what do we say, senior member in the church, and the deacon was kind of like helped in, like, serving us, talking with people. I mean, I may have it wrong, I don't know, we looked it up really quick.
Bishops were, and I'll just read this. It came, the Greek word for bishop is episcope, which means one who oversees a Christian church. So in our day, we would consider that as a pastor. Okay? And then the Greek word for deacon is diakonos, which means one who serves or ministers. So that would be maybe the lay ministers in the church. So the deacons would be the lay ministers, and the bishops would be the pastors. So, go ahead.
All right, well, we didn't have that.
That's fine. No, go ahead. I understand.
That's not, yeah, we didn't see that in Webster. But anyhow, it was talking about the importance, because both of these offices are important. You know, they're higher in the church, and people are gonna see them, and it was talking about, and some of these things are kind of scary to me when you get to reading them, you know?
Mhm.
Because it was talking about how they were to be blameless, you know, their life was not to show any kind of sin in it, or, you know, I mean, when it talked about being sober and good behavior, and you know, of course, be ready, you know, to be hospitable, and you're not supposed to be drinking, and you don't be hitting nobody, and don't be greedy, and, you know,
Yeah.
and then it, you know, went on to talk about, you know, not having a clean mind is what it was, you know, speaking of, and being patient. Well, patience, you know, is a hard thing, you know, not to be a brawler, which I'm assuming you're not gonna go out and fight, you know, and not to covet things, and then one that really, you know, talk about ruling your own house.
Exactly, yeah.
Woo! You know, that's a hard one. I mean, seriously, if you're a worker in the church and you can't control your own household, then that's scary, you know. And when it talks about, you know, being sober, and as it goes on, you know, the one I really liked was when it says not to be, and I might not pronounce this word right, forgive me, novice, you know, being lifted up for others, you know, because sometimes, you know, our pride, you know, thinking, you know, well, look what I did today, you know, and how good I did, you know, and stuff, but that's not what, he doesn't want that from us. So not only, all these things that he's wanting are for a reason, you know, but that, yeah, ruling your own house, and that's a difficult one these days. It really is,
Yeah,
because
it
a lot
is.
of houses not even together.
Unruly,
anymore.
yep.
So it's, you know, that one, because it was important, because you're a light. You know, if people look at you and you can't control what goes on in your own home, and you don't have, you know, the godliness that you should have in your own home, how can you work in the church? How can you do the things that God wants you to do in the church? And I can be so.
I think how it gets twisted and turned around is that when people start looking at it as a position instead of a possession, that's when their priorities get out of order, and they begin to look at people as they're beneath me and I'm above them.
Yes.
But as deacons and bishops, or pastors and ministers, we're all on the same playing field. We're all on the same level. The ground is level at Calvary, right? And we all came through the blood. So we've got to understand that it's not a position, it's a possession. I possess the grace of God and the mercy of God, and that's why I can do what God has called me to do.
So do you think when it's talking about being sober and being great, is that we're not supposed to smile and laugh and giggle? Because
Not at all.
Okay.
No.
Because sometimes people have thought that that's how you, and I'm not saying anything bad towards them, but you see some Christians that go by that never smile, they never giggle, they never laugh, and it's like, is that what God wants me to be? I mean, how is somebody going to want what I have if I look like that all the time?
Exactly.
Because I'm a giggler. If I get to giggling, I can't stop. I can't, you know, but I don't want to do something wrong either, so could you?
No, that's not doing anything wrong. In fact, it's contagious. Because when you're giggling, we're giggling, right? When you have joy in your heart and you can't contain it, other people are going to experience that same joy. So.
That's why it's also important to remember always to interpret Scripture with Scripture.
That's right.
The same Word of God also says, "A merry heart doeth good like a medicine."
Yes.
But we shouldn't die of overdose of it. We want to, you know, God gives joy, happiness,
Yes.
a joyful spirit. There's nothing wrong with having a good time. Thank God for times of refreshing like that.
Exactly.
I think, you know, we probably think about it, probably all know that person who's 40 years old and still trying to act like he's 20.
Mm-hmm.
And always cutting up and always causing a scene and always being crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you know what? That's not good for the gospel either. And so the Bible is very clear that moderation is key.
Yes.
It's not always all fun and games, but it's not always,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah. Looks like you're
it's just not.
sitting on attack all the time. Or
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
No, I think that being sober is more like being serious about the gospel. In other words, you're not taking it lightly, and
That's right.
it's not something that you joke about. You know, it's something that you take seriously. You know, that doesn't mean you're not you're in a very serious mood all the time. But the way that you look at the gospel is in a very serious manner, and it's not a joke to you. You know,
Yep.
kind of thing.
Good. And Mark, did you have something? No.
I was gonna say, Cheyenne said that the first time her mom came here, She asked if this was a funeral or a church service. So, I'm just saying.
I guess we need to. I guess we can
Brother
correct.
Rodney, there's been times I thought about pulling up one of our YouTube webcasts and just playing it and say, watch for yourself.
Yeah.
And then think about your actions.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Now that we got cameras, we got to be careful, don't we?
We want to notify our faces and our hearts and our actions and our spirit of the joy that resides within us.
When we're singing, yes,
When we're testifying, when we're listening, when we're engaged.
yes.
We're not just here doing time until the roast beef dinner is done.
Doing our duty.
Doing our duty.
So, having a good report in order to maintain the integrity of the gospel. So, we're not one way at church and a different way in the world.
That's right.
We're consistent, yes.
You can also go the other way though, because I went to a different church when I was in college when I first got saved, and it was, you know, I guess it's my own interpretation, but it was way too over the top, and the focus became on the people instead of God.
Mm-hmm.
So while you don't want to be long-faced and doleful, you know, on the one side, you don't want to be so crazy that it turns into a party.
That's right.
Because the party's in the fellowship, right back here. When we have the potluck, it's not here,
Right.
you know.
Very good. Question 5. Paul stated in chapter 4, verse 8, that bodily exercise profiteth little. Yes. What point do you think he was making with this phrase, and what did he say profits in all things? Group 5.
Guess that's me. That's the question you guys answered? Yeah. Well, good. We'll just sit here quietly then.
Well, combined. We'll
Go
take
ahead.
viewpoints from each side.
There's a photo.
Well, we don't really think that he was saying so much that, you know, bodily exercise does not do any good. He's making the point that no matter how good that is for you, how much better is it to exercise being godly? And on that note, that, you know, we talked about how exercising godliness is something that you actively do, just like if you go to the gym to work out. You know, it might take work, but the more you do it, the more spiritually in shape you'll become, the more natural it will be. But you need to, it's not something that is easy day one when you're coming into the gospel from nothing. I mean, you have a desire to want it to do better, but to exercise godliness is something that you have to sometimes think about.
Takes an effort, doesn't it?
That's right.
Yes. Good. This side want to add anything to that?
The only thing I would add to that is the verse 13 says, till I come give attendance to reading, to exhortation, and to doctrine. Neglect not the gift that is in thee, which was given thee by the prophecy with the laying on of the hands of the presbytery. So he is encouraging him here. Here's some exercises you can do that will exercise godliness. And it just backs up exactly what Brother Josh just said.
Very good. What are some benefits of physical exercise? You're
Feel
gonna,
better.
You're going to feel better. Yeah. You're probably going to live longer. Although I know people that have went out jogging and croaked.
I think the grace that Brother Josh alluded to is if you really get going into physical exercise, the first few days, weeks, maybe even month or so,
It's tough.
it is tough.
Painful.
And you want to just quit. I remember Zig Ziglar like all the time. He talks about when he decided he needed to lose some weight and get in shape. He decided to start running. And so the first day, he ran to the end of the driveway and crawled back. And the second day, he ran to the end of the driveway and one more step, and he crawled back. And by the time he was sharing the story, he was running marathons. So it was tough getting started, but once he just kept pushing a little farther every day, a little farther every day, a little farther every day, pretty soon it was no big deal to go out and run 26 miles. I can't imagine. But Anyway, the same thing so applies spiritually that if we just go a little closer every day, or a little closer to God, it won't be long and all of a sudden we realize, wow, look how far down our spiritual road, look how much we've grown spiritually. And just really a relatively short time just by doing our exercising godliness.
Exactly.
Also, like when you like try to stay fit, you have to sacrifice junk food, and you have to sacrifice, and it's the same thing with spiritual things. Like you have to take away all the negative effects.
All the things that are harmful for us spiritually, we have to remove them, don't we? We're on a spiritual diet, aren't we? And we want to put in those things that are good and healthy for our spiritual diet. And just like bodily exercise will maybe cause us to live a little longer, godly exercise in godliness, we've got an eternal hope, don't we? Far beyond this old world. We're thankful for that. So there are benefits in godly exercise. So question 6. 7, go ahead. Well, we'll skip 6 and we'll go back to it if we have time. Question 7. Paraphrase 1 Timothy 6:6. Godliness with contentment is great gain. What does contentment add to this inspired verse? Don't all talk at once.
Well, pretty much paraphrasing it, if you have God, and even if you have nothing else, you should still be happy.
Okay.
It's simple as that. And I've actually been there. I mean, we've had pretty much nothing, and we said to each other, well, we have each other and we have God, so we got it all.
Sure, good.
Be happy with what you have, and then it's all about your attitude.
So, is it only about material things, or can we be content with the circumstances that we're in? Because sometimes life throws us a curveball, doesn't it? And we don't have any control over it. We're just stuck in this situation that we don't know what to do. We're just here. Should we be content where we're at in those circumstances too? I think that's kind of what God's saying here too, is we need to be content with those circumstances. They're not the best conditions, but if we have godliness with contentment, we're going to gain, aren't we?
We're going to run into it several times throughout my life that I've been in a situation, whether a job situation or personal whatever, that you face hard times or challenging times, and you're very discontent with your situation that you're in, and your human reaction is to react. And that's it. I'm marching myself in my boss's office, and I'm quitting today, and I'm finding myself something different, and blah 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 blah. And thankfully, the Lord's been good to work on me to keep my mouth shut, because I can look back at those times now and think, had I done that, the disaster that would have been waiting for me, had I just bulldozed my way in and just tried to make it my own way. And so we will just be content with where we are and pray about it and just wait on the Lord. Either one of two things will happen. Your situation where you're in will get better. It will. Or the Lord will change it.
Exactly.
And give you something better.
So do you think that's the part of the verse that's talking about is gain? Is great gain? Not just gain, but great gain.
Yep.
And that great gain could be peace of mind. You know, we may not like the circumstance that we're in, but if we are content with that circumstance, God will give us a peace about it, won't He?
So Brother Rodney, I've heard it said too, that you always say the grass is greener on the other side. Well, your neighbor on the other side is fertilizing it and watering it and all these things. If you move over there, it won't be long before your grass will look like it did before, because you won't do those things. There's a reason why his grass is greener. And if we were constantly going through life thinking, there's got to be something better, there's got to be something better, a better job, a better position, a better car, a better house, a bigger this, a bigger that. We live life miserable because we can never catch up with, oh, if only I had, what a miserable place to be. And it's just saying, man, God, I am thankful for what I have.
Exactly.
It may only be a shack in the woods with outdoor plumbing, but it's a roof.
You got outdoor plumbing?
Yeah, we're looking at how we moved in next week though.
Brother, right now, I think of some of the testimonies from folks in Romania many years ago and in Africa, where they walked for miles and miles and miles just to get to church. And they had little to nothing. They had one suit of clothes that they wore for church, and they came all crisp and washed and ready to go. And I think, man, that just puts us to shame sometimes when you read those and think about having to walk miles and miles to church. But they have something. They have that godly contentment that only God can give. And they feel like they've won the lottery, almost, because they have God and they're rich in Christ.
Sure, and the spirit in those meetings too. And as you watch those videos, I mean, there were some awesome prayer meetings. Yes.
And another thing I was thinking about when you was talking about being content in our situations, and this came really, the other day, this really hit me hard, is sometimes our situations are our own doing. Because we reap what we sow. I mean, that's just a given. And now, unfortunately, we don't have to reap everything we sow because, some of us will be in bad spots for sure. But we are going to pay for things that we did, that we've caused in our own lives. So our situations sometimes are our doing because of what we chose at a different time in our life. And even though we're saved and we're fixing things in our life now, we're still going to have to pay some of the price.
Exactly.
And and the thing was, because sometimes I would think, well, why is this happening, or why can't this get better, or why? And then it came, and it was a preacher on the radio said something about we got to pay for things we did years ago. Maybe it's not because of anything tomorrow. Maybe it's not because you're doing anything right now, but you're paying because you reap what you sow.
Sure.
And so then we have to get to the point that say, okay, this is my doing. Help me to be okay with this.
And that's where we got to be content. We're stuck in this.
A perfect example of that, Brother Rodney, is many, many years ago, we had driven a car that lacked much, and it had a sunroof that leaked, and in the rain, your head would get all wet, and the transmission worked about half the time, and so it's never quite new. And so finally, we decided that we were done, and so we were going to go buy ourselves a brand new car, and boy, did we. And when we had to get another car because my little Olivia was on the way, we still were paying for that brand new car and the payment of our new, very used car that we could only barely afford because we still had to pay on the brand new car that we just had to have because we weren't content.
Yep. And life has its ways, doesn't it?
It does.
Paying us. So, yep. Good. Question 8.
By the way, I've never made that mistake again.
Question 8. What is the root of all evil? Money?
The love of money.
The love of money.
All right. It's not the money that is evil, but it's the love of it, isn't it? So.
Basically, it's the love of anything before God.
Exactly.
Right, and that's what is the principle involved there. It doesn't mean that every sin that's committed is because somebody loved money. No, when Cain slew Abel, it wasn't because he loved money. Or when King Saul committed suicide, it wasn't because he loved money. Well, it's all, in the sense of all kinds of evil. It will produce other sin if you let money be your God.
Good. Yep. So what are some indicators of somebody that loves money? What are some signs that we might witness?
Well, one comes to mind, never satisfied.
Never satisfied, always wanting more,
Yeah.
always trying to get more.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. What about working all the time? Pretty soon they're missing church.
Yeah.
They're missing church functions. They're missing home time with their family. The love of money. They got to have more, right? How can we guard against being caught in the trap of the love of money? How can we guard our hearts against it? Because really, as we live in this country, all the commercials that you watch, all the advertisements, they're all geared towards the love of money. They're enticing you with these bright, flashy things that you can have if you only put so much money down and pay so much a month. You can have all these bright, flashy things, and you can be just like your neighbor. How do we guard our hearts against that?
By not.
We could get rid of the TV.
Yep.
Get rid of what?
And I'm not saying that it's bad to have things. That's not the case. But when those things overtake your ability to be in church and to be in your place and to serve the Lord and to even get in your way of your daily devotions because you're running out the door trying to make a living, that's when you know that the love of money is taken over.
Well, Brother Rodney, too, I think it's not just the hard work, because there's just sometimes people have to work that hard just to provide for their family.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? But it's what are you doing with your money?
Sure.
You know, are you working overtime every night and every Sunday because you want a new boat?
Mm-hmm.
Are you working overtime all the time because you need to have a bigger house because you only got 2 kids, but you need 16 bedrooms so you can compete with your cousin down the street who's got a 17-bedroom house and 3 boats? What is your motivation for what you're doing? You know, sometimes people just have to work really hard because they're just trying to put food on the table. And they may not have a job that pays a whole lot of money, and so they got to work a lot of hours to make enough money. So just somebody working a lot doesn't necessarily prove that they have a love of money. What are they doing with that money? What is their motivation for that? Is it to take care of their family, or you know? And when I say take care of your family, I'm not talking about put your kids in all brand name clothes and all your kids drive a Porsche. I'm talking about put food on the table and a roof over their heads. But if your motivation is to have the biggest and the best and the newest and the latest, then you are craving money. You're coveting what your neighbor has.
But don't you think that God can provide for you?
Absolutely.
Even if you put God first,
Right.
and God will take care of the rest. And if this job causes you to start missing church and neglecting your duties as a Christian, God will provide you another job in the means to take care of your family and your bills or whatever. God will take care of all the rest. If you put God first, He'll work out all the rest.
I think it's honoring God with our money too. I mean, if we're giving God the first fruits and giving Him the tithes and showing Him that we honor Him, you know, He blesses.
Exactly.
And how we spend our money is important. Do we honor Him with the way we spend our money?
That's right.
So I think all of that plays a part of it too.
And the rich young ruler was the perfect example in Jesus' day, because he did all the rest of it.
Yeah.
He did. He kept the 10 Commandments. He kept all that. He said, I've done that since I was small. But he had, when Jesus told him, he said, go sell all that ye have and give to the poor. Jesus was looking at his heart. He was looking at those possessions. He was looking at his love for those possessions. You can have stuff that God has blessed you with without having the love for it.
That's right.
Sure.
But that fella, as far as we know, he lost his soul because he had great possessions and he did not want to give them up.
Exactly. So
Now, if he'd have took them and sold them and said, okay, Lord, I'm following you, he'd have been okay.
yeah,
But he did not.
it stood between him and God.
He couldn't
So
turn it loose.
when we get to that place where it doesn't matter, if I lose everything, it don't matter. It's just stuff. What's important is what I've got in my heart, right?
Yeah, that's what
And that's
God
where that
That's it.
contentedness comes into play. Being content.
Content, yes, exactly. Very good. One last question, we'll skip 6, but go to 9. Paul reiterated a good profession, a godly witness or testimony that Timothy had demonstrated and lived before his fellow men. Then he encouraged Timothy to fight the good fight of faith. How can we do this today? How can we fight the good fight of faith? How can we live out a godly life in the day and the time that we live in, from day to day? How can we let our light shine and live a godly life?
Be consistent.
Being consistent. Very good.
Deny ourselves and take up the cross daily follow Jesus regardless of where he leads.
Exactly. Yep. Just doing what we're supposed to do every day. It becomes a habit. And if we're consistent in following God, he'll bless us, won't he? He'll give us the desires of our heart. So, very good Bible study.
All else, stand. Sister Moniz, will you close with prayer for us, please?
Heavenly Father, we're so thankful for the opportunity to be in your house.
Yes.
Thank you, O God, for this Bible lesson. Help us to learn from it, O Lord, and to draw closer to you. To dig deep into your word and gather all those golden nuggets out of it, Lord. Put it into our hearts. Hide it in our hearts that we might not sin against you. Keep us, O Lord, in your care. Bless in the remaining of this week, Lord. Guide us, Lord, that we'll always be faithful to you and keep your commandments. Follow in your word, obey your word, and do the will of our Father in heaven. Now we pray your blessings on us as we leave. Keep us in your care, and may we give you glory and honor in all things.